everything is wrong. We actually can find each other without this language. And a second later, we started talking about that. We cried a little bit, hugged a little bit, and then that's why I'm not really surprised about the topic of the talk today. And she's a professor in AI health, if I recall correctly, at the University of Nottingham. She studied psychology here in Granada. That's why she liked it so much. I'm hoping that you love being here. And we are computer scientists, but I can say that. And I got the very same television at home, but I don't know what it is. I mean,
maybe I can, if I have my screen here, I can talk to you without slides.
Yeah, I think we should try with a different laptop again. What's going on with the TVs there? Anyway, just not to take up time of you guys. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. Take it away. Thank you very much. Is it working?
Yes, it's working.
Good, good stuff.
So thank you so much, Isaac. It's a real pleasure and very special for me to be here because, as he mentioned, I study psychology at the top of the hill. And so it's very nice to be back after so many years as a full professor. So it makes me proud of the work I've done. So in Nottingham, I work between the School of Medicine and the School of Computer Science. And the title is I'm Professor of Mental Health and Digital Technologies. Traditionally, I look at how tech impacts in our well-being and mental health. And lately, I've been moving towards what responsible AI really means. So when I'm giving a talk, I look at the diversity of the audience. And it's nice to see this group is quite diverse. Female representation maybe is not as high as I personally would like to see, but it's nice to see there's many different faces, which is great. Diversity is usually very subtle. It's not, you can have an extremely diverse group of people, but maybe diversity isn't there. And when we look at AI, diversity of data is what may reduce the biases we see in outcomes. So diversity within the data you collect, diversity within the location and the way, the methods. So we need diversity in everything we do to ensure that the AI benefits as many people as possible. So should I put here my computer?
The slides are online.
The slides are actually online.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, but
Okay.
you're not going to see what's going on. Right?
But we don't see anything.
Sí.
Lo pilla y luego lo quita para intentar ajustar la resolución. Y si trata de cambiar la resolución. ¿La habéis puesto una ansia pequeña o no? Porque parece ser que no hay problema de cable de nadie, sino que necesita ver si luego cuando se nos da ajustar la resolución.
Bueno, I think I'm going to move to the analog version. I would like to, so my talk, it has three different parts. In the first one, I wanted to talk to you about Responsible AI UK, which is a research program I'm part of. Within that program, I lead on RRI, Responsible Research and Innovation, and also EDI, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. Responsible innovation is something quite abstract. And when we talk about ethics and AI in health, again, sometimes it's not an easy concept to grasp, but also it's not an easy concept to apply. So I have some cards, and what I would like you to do is, maybe they are not enough because there are 16 only, but maybe click one and pass the rest, because the technology is not working. We can play cards, which can be also quite fun. So Responsible AI is a 30 million 5-year research project. And what we are trying to do is bring together different institutions, different sectors to promote responsibility. And the way we do it is by engaging with a lot of different partners, doing workshops, doing training, and then funding, because we are like a mini funding agency. We've already deployed £16 million in specific small research projects. So we only fund projects that are very sound in terms of responsibility, either because the efforts they make in collecting data that is diverse, or maybe the topics, or the idea is to create projects that are going to benefit society, and they are going to benefit us all as much as possible. So by now, some of you may have one part. So any volunteer to read it, please? Thank you.
So everything or just the first
So
one?
what I would like you to do is tell us the color and the concept that is trying to tackle, and then what you will see in each card is on the back, you'll see the range of the topic, and then you have prompts and also examples that will illustrate how you put that into practice.
Okay, so it's a green card. The main topic is
Engagement, yeah.
and has two parts, as you mentioned. So it's the stakeholder input is, the issue we are discussing about is how can stakeholders influence the product or outputs? Are a wide range of stakeholders considered, and when and at what stage? Does this include people with relevant lived experience?
Perfect. Thank you. So in the area of medicine, mental health, for example, how many of you that are working in that sector, any other sector, how many of you involve the user into the development, into the design, the deployment? How many of you make that you do? Perfect. Yeah, fantastic. So how important is stakeholder engagement to understand their views, their perspectives? Because it's so easy as computer scientists to build something that we believe is fantastic, but then in the way, like social media, there are collateral damage that maybe we did not anticipate. So this type of processes help you to listen to other voices, but also try to anticipate potential problems. Thank you. And would you like to read us some examples of how you put that in practice?
So there are 4 examples: define objectives and expectations for the stakeholder input, convene a user stakeholder panel or advisory group, employ human-centered design methods, and get early and frequent feedback.
Yeah, 4 simple examples of how you engage your stakeholders with maybe an advisory group, maybe a focus group, and you ask a specific question that you feel your system needs to take care of or be sensitive to. Thank you. So anybody with a blue card that would like to read us? Blue? Yes?
Here it says act.
Act. So what are you going to do about it? Because it's easy to talk about ethics and responsibility, but you need an action plan.
In the area 4Ps framework, the 4th key activity is to act. That is, to use the insights gained from anticipation, reflection, and engagement in order to make a difference in the work being done. This closes the loop of responsible innovation. Ultimately, responsibility can only be discharged through action. Relating to that, every card includes a number of example actions. These lists are not exhaustive, and there are many other resources and practices available to support responsible innovation. In this step, there are hard looks beyond the current product.
Okay. So what you're reading as a definition card. So it's telling you how to, basically it's defining what we mean by acting in the area of responsible AI. So in the UK, we follow a specific framework called the ENIA, which is what the main funders, UKRI, wants us to do. Actually, each time you apply for funding, there is a section where you have to describe your plans, your RRI plans. And the area framework is A means anticipate, R is for reflection, and reflecting practices is something, again, computer scientists we usually will do. And then the A is for anticipation, and then the and engagement. So we read engagement, we had the definition of act. Can I ask someone else with a blue card to read some prompts and some examples? Yeah.
It's about openness. The questions are about examples only.
Please, you can give us prompts or maybe one prompt and one example.
So the prompt are how can other build on the work done, and also is support available for this. It's about how can other professors access the information, and examples are be transparent about the work and any products, or publish and publicitate the outcomes and make data fair.
Yeah. Well, it's calling for transparency, but not only on the way you work, but also when you are publishing, make sure it's open access and make sure it's as accessible as possible. And the information used to be as transparent, again, as possible. Obviously, for very obvious reasons. I guess you know the FAIR framework. FAIR is, in computer science, is what? Fairness, accountability, interoperability, and okay. So there are like FAIR. There are many other different frameworks that, again, as computer scientists, help to build that community of trust. So we have two more colors. Yellow. Anybody will yes?
Yellow is reflect.
Reflect. Yeah.
And unintended consequences, how could the work be used or misused? What negative consequences might it have? And what might happen if it goes wrong?
So that's a very, I think, quite good one and very relevant, specifically with responsible AI. How do you build a system that cannot be misused? Or is there any protection? Is there any boundary? Are there any ways you can make sure that your product or your services are used always responsibly? That's massive, that's really difficult. But again, it's helping you to define and start thinking very early on how to protect society ultimately and the well-being of everyone by creating systems that have walls and are difficult to be misused. Yes, we had a blue, a yellow, and I think we are missing one color. Red, orange. Yeah. Any volunteers to read? Yes. Thank you.
The main thing is sustainability. There is some prompts and some examples.
Okay, you're gonna read one of each, for example.
How sustainable are the products and the products. And the example is a direct and indirect environmental impact.
Environment. How important. And how much we are hearing now in the media that AI is actually not going to do any good to the environment, but at the same time it's being sold as the solution for climate change. And that's a massive contradiction that you, in a way, are the next generation of computer scientists that will have to think very carefully about the environment and how to make projects sustainable. So this is just an example of one of the tools we've used for the community to think and reflect about what responsible AI means and to make sure it's more confiable, more trustworthy. So this is work we've done with, and we are championing within responsible AI. And can I move this?
You can try.
Careful.
That's so good. Okay, so very quickly, responsible AI. So this is the whole team, and I'm just showing you pictures because we have quite influential people. We have a representative, so the Wendy Hall, she's part of the UN. She's an advisor of AI. Tom Roden, he used to be, he's back in Nottingham. He used to be an advisor for governments. Matthew, she's a scientist, but we have artists, we have policymakers, HCI, doctors, surgeons, policy. So it's a very diverse group. This is one of our missions, is to bring different groups that are working on AI, that they are Turing, government, industry, together under that umbrella that we call responsible AI. These are our, let's say, unique selling points. The team has expertise. We already provided quite a lot of funding, and we only fund specific projects that are championing responsible AI. And we are there to connect initiatives and to create a community and a culture of responsible. Oh, social. Anyway, once I explained what responsible AI was, I wanted to do an exercise about diversity in AI and what it means to you. So maybe I will keep doing this a bit interactive. You need to help me here. This is not easy.
I think the best thing to do is you guys use actually your laptops, so you can see what's going on, and you look at the screen here.
Okay.
That's the only way.
And how do I, and I guess, on the computer?
No, it's yeah, and everybody's seeing it online.
Very good.
It's not, you're not looking up there. It's fine.
So on the screen now you can see some of the projects we've funded. And I'm presenting this just to see the variety of projects. So there are projects on electoral voting, on statistics in healthcare, NLP for mental health, robots. So there are many different projects. And the keystone projects are the biggest ones. They are 3-4 million each. And as you can see, the first one looks at biases in policing data, and it's about trying to educate the police force or the law enforcement agencies to understand that the outputs they get around who to detain or who to ask, they are all probabilistic exercises, because it feels that now we have a massive responsibility to educate many organizations not to 100% believe the data or the outcomes they are getting from a specific system, because at the end of the day, it's just probabilistic. And this is something is very important in the area of medicine. Now we're talking about, is AI advising the doctor, is helping them to make a decision, and how that decision is going to be taken. And if you think about it, doctors sometimes, they're not God, they don't know sometimes what to do, they have a gut feeling, but that experience can be modulated by AI outputs. And this is something that we see more and more often. And we have to educate all those professionals to know when to rely on AI and when not. And that's something quite challenging.
This is extremely.
Do you know, I'm going to use my computer as, or just this one.
You can use this one.
But as students,
Right, they should see that. Yeah.
so this is like to focus on or make you reflect on why diversity in AI is everybody's responsibility. But you can see in the image, there's a beautiful ecosystem full of diversity under the sea. And what I want you to think is that the fish that you're going to see in the next slides, that's data. Yeah, think about fish as data. So anybody would like to tell me why, when you have a system where data is representative, you have a massive, really good data set. Why is it better for decision making? When you have a very good data set.
Because you're representing on the minorities that they're that data.
Yeah. So the data is more representative, therefore the decisions you can make hopefully will be more accurate and will be hopefully less discriminatory. Because as you know, there are so many issues with systems that have been trained only on maybe specific groups of the planet that are usually more privileged than others. Why should it help you improve problem solving when you have data diversity?
You're covering much more different issues and different variants of the problem you're trying to solve.
Es reducible in other scenarios. Why do you think it will produce more greater creativity and innovation?
In the same way that human creativity is, so if you have more experience on different topics, you can combine them, and this is one of the chances to create new things.
Yes. And there is some scholars that are talking about a global, and a normalized global brain. It seems that creativity and the nuances, the specifics, the difference, the little things that make things original are disappearing slowly because of the lack of diversity and so many data sets we use. Obviously, it can enhance product development, again, for obvious reasons, competitiveness. So diversity is good, and that's the message I'm going to convey. It will help you locate or put products into the market for different customers and not think as your end user as a unified entity. We are all very different, and it's important to cater for all that differences. And also diversity, not only on the data, but on the people you work with. It will create an organization that it has that, and that's, we know that by organizational psychology, is a better commitment and also a sense of belonging. When you see that you are not the only one, that makes a massive difference. And you all understand that when you feel the only woman or the only person with specific protected characteristic in a room. And that's so important. Contributions in a unique way, again, it will enrich the way, basically the way you work. So from the very beginning, think always about diversity and how important it is. This is something quite interesting, the simulation for any member outside of the dominant group. That happens inevitably. We try to fit. And by trying to fit, sometimes again we lose that diversity because we don't want to be the odd one out. So it's a current between the diversity we want, but also how do we build the resilience in the system to account for differences and to respect that we are also different. Nobody should be feeling bad because they are the minority. Power, ideology, and discursive acts, again, kill diversity. The powerful voice will try to always dominate and create a neutralized medium way of working. And this is very important. Symbols, rituals, stories to maintain positions of power. AI, again, has that danger of creating this normalized society with everybody should fit in a specific. So how do we create systems that will account? And in mental health, in medicine, that's so important. Each patient is different, and AI claims that will champion personalized medicine. Is that true? It will depend probably on the data. This little image I am putting there, I think it's nice and illustrative because it shows you the difference between inequalities. So imagine that two little boys One comes from a very privileged, loving family, the other one maybe from a care home with trauma. So when exposed to an opportunity, one will be better placed. And we can say, okay, I give both the same ladder, but always the child that comes from a more disadvantaged group may not reach. So the opportunity is there, but probably they are not going to make it. So when we talk about equity, what we're doing is giving one child give a ladder to account for existing inequalities. And when we talk about justice, here we're bending the truth to make sure both can reach. So again, when building systems, when thinking about AI, think about these elements. Are we producing or creating systems that are going to promote equity and equality and justice in society? This is an interesting project where we talk about gender in AI, and we talk about what is missing currently in AI. How can we make AI more responsible? And LLMs, that was a topic that was very recurring coming and on about LLMs not being representative. Issues around data ethics, not enough plurality of voices to tackle gender imbalances. Again, cultural and language biases. We see that a lot in generative AI. The mistakes that generative AI is still making are sometimes culturally so inappropriate. But why? Because, again, the data is not diverse enough. And probably you know this famous example of asking generative AI to produce some images of Second World War, and they were individuals that were not just white, they were black, Chinese, and that was a massive issue because AI could not understand the cultural sensitivity of what the act was. We talk also about the global south and the global north. How can AI make sure that that disparities are not there? And a topic very important is the AI literacy. How can we educate society to make the right choices? And how can we promote critical skills? And this is some of the cards of who they are promoting critical skills to avoid this normalized global brain and help with data donation, or is it, what can we do as citizens, as individuals to promote this?
One question.
Yes.
But these first 2 points
Yes.
regarding literacy and the critical things is depending on the culture will I guess. So how can we somehow globalize and normalize this?
So the idea is not to globalize and normalize it, but to have LLMs that, for example, we have a few projects that are developed in rural Bangladesh, and they are sensitive to not only to their language, but to the beliefs, the cultural differences. So the idea is to have a system where you can choose your, so instead of having one that is global and normalized for everybody, you have one that is specific to your culture, to your beliefs. So this is by talking to and making all these workshops around the world. Because the good thing is that we probably quite a lot with this program. So these are some of the issues we've identified, and that's the issues we try to fund. So when we get funding applications, if they fit within these topics, the likelihood will be better. And we still have some funding calls open, and you are all very welcome to apply. So just some topics that I would like to maybe highlight from here is the need to create these sustainable models of rich and representative consented data from represented groups. And consent is a massive issue. So how do you get the data from those that are not part of the conversation? And that's a massive challenge. But again, that's something that if you work on ethical frameworks, then I guess that's where you should be. But it means that we need some data donation systems, non-for-profit organizations, governments creating LLMs that contain less biases or they are more representative. But then we need this global political leadership, and that's some of the work we are doing. So when you think about diversity in AI, think about diversity of data, but also the diversity of the people involved in your system, diversity of thoughts and thinking, diversity of methods, and all that will probably create the diversity data sets we need, and the diversity of, for example, LLMs, images, you name it. This is a funny equation I created just to illustrate what we mean by EDI. So it means equality, but also equity. It means diversity and tolerance to difference. It means inclusivity, and by inclusivity, it means everybody should feel represented. I, as an individual, as the self, should be part of that data set to be representative and therefore be responsible. So for me, these are all the ingredients, active ingredients to create responsible AI. I can show you the cards. The cards are for free. These are all the steps. As we've seen, they explore the anticipation process, think about what could happen. It shows you an exercise to reflect, to think about issues that usually you don't have the time to think about in terms of, for example, unintended consequences, potential conflicts. Who doesn't want your product to be out of the market? Who's your competitor and buying? Engagement exercises, and also what to do about it. The cards can be downloaded on that QR code. I will pass these slides to Isaac, and you can download them. And I think they're playful exercise at any level. There are some links to papers, and also how to run exercises with these cards online, etc. And yes, that's the end. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, yes.
Anyway, thank you very much, and I'm very sorry everyone for all technical issues. Are there any questions?
Beautiful job, and great, and very exciting. But who will police the data set? And what will be the punishments if you find biases?
So currently the legislation is not there. And even if it's there, so in the UK we have the Online Safety Act. And it's there to protect mostly children and anybody from any harms online, inappropriate content, harmful content, violence, and it's not working. So unfortunately, I'm a bit cynic, because even when you have the legislation, things don't happen. The trend I see in big corporations is that the monopoly, the market is being monopolized, and I guess they budget for fines, and that's part of the practices, because so far nobody's policing the representativeness of data sets, and we see examples that are very harmful for specific groups. Yeah, there's so much work to do. I mean, do you know any examples of data sets that have been audited? There are actually benchmarks. There are exercises that will give you a traffic light amber, red, green, depending on how diverse.
In medicine, I don't know any data set that we have.
Yeah, well, actually, there is a,
I don't know if there.
I think it's Harvard, so there's a university in the States that they provide tools for you to run your data sets, and they will give you an index of how good they are or not in terms of representativeness. I'll pass that to you.
I would just wanted to say that, well, there are many interpreting concepts, but there is something on usual laws, on bias policy, when a system is biased and it's affecting human beings, and there are different cases. I'm not an expert on law, but I'm a lawyer. So, you know, all these compass and all these issues where they were using an AI system, training with the biased data set, and it was applying a biased decision. It has been impeached and the law has acted, even if it's not a specific law for AI, specific law for representativeness.
Yes.
So at the end, I think people, of course, I would like to have it stronger, but there are some accountability issues, and I don't know, I'm not even able to say it in Spanish, that who's blame on the use of the system at the end. So there is something, there's a law term on saying who has the responsibility of the decision that the system has taken.
And that's the accountability is a massive issue. And some practices I see are that you acknowledge that your data set is not diverse. It's not 100% representative. And that's a given because nobody has a data set that is complete. Then you declare that your data set is not responsible, and then you do whatever you have to do, and it's kind of a way to free your responsibility by declaring that there's this, usually we don't talk about bias. The bias comes in the output because of the lack of diversity. So the algorithm doesn't bias anything, it's just that it doesn't contain the full data set. Then the effort is to add that data that is missing. That's something, sometimes we don't have the funding or don't have the urge to do, because the financial gain may not be there. So why are you going to spend so many resources in getting a very minority group into that data set? But that's what, to me, responsible AI means, making that extra effort because of justice, because of inequalities.
Any other questions or follow-up?
I guess for me, it's how we measure fairness or how responsible the data is, right? Because if we were to know how to do it, we can actually create a perfect data set, right? But how do you do that if you don't know really how to measure that?
So that's again a massive challenge. In the UN, they are doing massive exercises that God knows how much it costs to gain consensus, global consensus of what fairness means. And probably they will come up with a beautiful report and then some guidelines and then what?
And everybody has it, yeah.
So it's again the personal commitments. I feel that from computer science, from developers, from data scientists, to say, okay, I'll put effort, a little bit of effort on this because you feel it's important, it's personal responsibility. Otherwise, I don't feel there is a push or there is any incentives. Responsible, well, obviously I'm talking about my, but we are funding lots of projects in specific, so rural Bangladesh is one of them, in different countries, in Africa, in South America. We're trying to incentivize researchers to create that data that seems to be constantly missing. Yeah.
That question, your answer. I wonder about what is the difference, how can we expect to the machine to learn what is fair and unfair biases? I mean, for example, if you take the age, that could be an unfair bias, but we all know that a child will be typically the average age will be smaller than the age of that another person. This is a bias, but it is not an unfair bias, so it is what it is. So how we expect that the machine learn what is unfair biases?
I think that's a technical question I may not be able to solve, but the little thing I know about machine learning is that you have some supervised and or some
Not
reinforcement.
for the technical aspect, but how can we, what is the definition of unfair or fair bias?
Yeah, I think it depends very much on which domain we are working. So maybe to decide whether you can receive money from the bank to buy a house is not fair to your average hire. But for example, I'm working with some kind of informers and the average age is really an issue. So I think the problem is that the scenarios are very diverse and taking account which kind of scenario we are and which of these features are fair or not fair. That's the problem for me. So,
And then the stakeholder engagement exercise is the exercise that can give you that sense of fairness. And fairness for whom?
Yeah.
Because it's a very depends on, it's very contextual, but then you can make that choice, invite different voices, and together maybe you can reach a consensus. Not everybody is going to be happy, but at least you are closer to that ideal of what fairness means. But it is, I invite you to work in that way because it makes you feel better at the end of the day. Because you can be the body of the goodie, so be the goodie is good for health.
Yeah, just a very short one because this is so exciting. So I fully understand, Carlos, because at the end, it's a question I've made to Marco Cámara, so when he came here. So you have the real world, you have the ideal world. We want to have an ideal world, a fair world, but sometimes things are as they are. So if you're an engineer and you build a model, unfortunately, sometimes your model reflects what is happening there.
No, so you have in your mind a control.
No,
What is the not the real world?
This compass system, that is a system that is helping lawyers in the US to decide if somebody is getting out from the jail or not. And you can get the very best data set covering all.
Again, you know historically where the bias is historical.
No, the bias is in the story. Yes, so this your figure on equality, equity, and so on was great. So that's what must be applied. But if you want to make a model represent the real world situation in that moment, that's the real world situation. We want to change it, and we are going to use AI to change that. But if you want to model the real world, the problem is that one. So I guess your question was going in that way. So we need to work together. Right? I fully agree.
There is a tweaking, a tuning of playing God. Because how do you decide what's the right thing? So we know, for example, in another very exactly in recruitment, we know that there's a proportion of men and women. So we just So do we just simply perpetuate what's there, or how do we change it, and who has that power and that responsibility to? So again, but this is all an exercise to think, reflect, and to be critical with the way we think. So that's, you are all going to be fine.
Be sure you're in a friendly environment, so we all are committed.
All right, so what we're going to do is, if I need to resolve the issues with the telly, I'm gonna ask you to get out, and then we're gonna do the sweet talks. So, yeah. Our second talk is from our very own Coral del Mar. I haven't prepared at all, but what I remember from Coral, apart from that she's traveling all the time and riding her flights to Germany, is that she's a biologist by background. That's what we studied, right? And she converted herself into a bioinformatician. At the minute, she can touch it prof in computer science, but hopefully will be a prof very soon whenever, all the Anyway, I'm not going to take more time. What we're going to do is 3 talks in a row, right? With 5 minutes question, 25 minutes for yourself enjoy yourself. Take us away. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Isaac, for the nice introduction. And I want to thank Elvira because she addressed a lot of issues that I usually run. So usually I work very much in different aspects of health, but today I'm going to work about the collaboration that we have been developing in the Human Genetic Institute in Germany. And all moves together, but then the paper that I'm going to talk today has been affected last week in leukemia, and is a new insight about something that everyone maybe have heard. Yeah, Danny asked me, please, no biology, but sorry. I mean, I will speak about immunology, that is very complex, but I need to tell something about biology because the thing is, if we don't understand what we want to classify in the diet, it will be very difficult to find the appropriate method. And I think in the forum where we are, everyone is quite expert or had a lot of experience designing models and machine learning. It can be difficult, challenging, but it's a knowledge background, knowledge application. The key question is, how do I use this knowledge really to do something where everyone else failed before? So what I'm going to talk today is about subgrouping germinal-centered derived research based on machine learning on DNA methylation. So to make it easier,
Don't break it. Thank you.
So what are germinal-centered derived research informats? For you, the only thing that you need to know is everyone, probably most of you have heard about lymphomas, Hodgkin lymphomas and non-Hodgkin lymphomas. So these very centered derived research lymphomas are non-Hodgkin lymphomas, and they are immunological cancer, and they are really striking with very high numbers each year that goes on. So the problem is that this attack of white blood cell and usually happens in the germinal center from the lymph nodes. This means that we have a naive B cell, and this B cell goes through different stages where they are hypermutated, where they are recombined, so to produce the antibodies that are going to fight against any kind of infection. So that's the reason why they have to be hypermutated, because we need to have many combinations that are able to recognize something that we never saw before. This is very tight regulated. The problem is when the process is broken due to genetic mutation that were not foreseen or genetic alteration, and then starts the tumor. The thing is, as you see, this is a linear process, but depending where we start to have the problems, we have different kinds of lymphomas and leukemia. So when we have the mutation before going to the germinal center, we have leukemias, and then started in the germinal center, we can have multiple lymphomas, follicular lymphomas, and B-cell lymphomas, and then we can have other ones. So it's depending on where it happens, we have a problem. What's the thing? We are going to talk. We are going to talk today about follicular lymphomas and DLBCL lymphomas. So why these two ones? These two ones, they are the most common non-Hodgkin lymphomas. Follicular lymphomas account for almost 25% of non-Hodgkin lymphomas and 40% in the case of DLBCL. The problem is that they happen in a very short developmental time, and the difference are very subtle. And it's even more complex because follicular lymphomas, they can transform and transition to DLBCL lymphomas. So, in fact, we don't have a class, we have a continuum. Some of them are more frequent than the others, but we have a continuum. Why is so important to be able to distinguish this kind of lymphomas? It's a question that if we fail to decide which type or subtype are they, and we give a treatment, this person is advocate the relapse of the disease and death. So that you can have an idea, follicular lymphoma are incurable, but they are very slow growing. So usually the strategy is to try to manage patient problems, and avoid that it will start the transformation into DLBCL. Because DLBCL, they are very aggressive cancers, tumors. Usually 40% of the people, they die because of relapse, continuous relapse, or refractory disease. This means that they don't react to any kind of line of action of chemotherapy. So as you see, it's a very interesting case, and also because it affects relatively young people. So, but it's also the problem. The problem is even if we have people that are diagnostic with DLBCL, the same diagnostic, they are really totally different from each other. There is a great variability in genetic mutation, in transcriptomic, epigenetic changes, immunophenotype, which makes it really difficult to decide which subgroups we are belonging to. Moreover, to make it even more, we have different subgroups, but to make it more complex, the signatures that are known are overlapping between subgroups. For example, here we have two kinds of DLBCLs. They are called GCB or ABC. I'm going to talk now about that. These are the very clear groups that one knows that they sit within the DLBCL, but not the only ones. But here I just put the mutations that they have. They have the same mutations, the same pathways alterated, and the same activation or deactivation components. That if you want to measure something, you are not going to find any difference. So we have a continuum, and then we have from the subtypes overlapping features that cannot allow us to distinguish them. So the challenge is great. So I'm not the first one. We are not the first one working with this. There have been many approaches. For example, the Dana-Farber Institute. I mean, this is not small groups, really big groups. The Dana-Farber Institute, they tried with mutation and transcriptomic using manufacturization. They identified 5 subtypes of these cancers, tumors, but the problem is they are not able to reproduce them in any other cohort than the discovery cohort. Yeah, we talk about reproducibility again, for example, and they have very small overlap with other approaches, so not reproducible. And in the case of Blix gene, they use mutational and structural rearrangement. This is the only one that is being used somehow in the clinic. What they do, they use 6 genetic alterations, so they have features that they know, and it's like association rules. If you have A, B, and C, then you are this type, etc. What's the problem? That is only for DLBCL. Some of the subtypes, some others are not recognized, and they lack consensus between algorithms. The great problem from this one is that they only recognize what we already know. So the very clear cases that everyone knows from many times, but still is using the clinic. Then there was a very recent approach of using transcriptomic and supervised machine learning, and they were the first one distinguished between the cell of origin of the DLBCL. This is what I told before, ABC, BCLB, or GCB. What's the problem? That the cell of origin is very simplistic. It doesn't reflect at all the heterogeneity in genetic and epigenetic and reaction to the different lines of treatment, etc. So it's not being used. Just only to say, okay, you are this one or the other. And there is another big problem. If we take 100% of samples, more than 40% are classified as undefined. And this is the real thing that we see. So they are just looking at what we already know, and it's easy to detect. And the last approach was this double hit signature with the transcriptome and targeting some mutations and rearrangement. And they found a special type of DLBCL with a mutation unique. The problem is when you try to reproduce this, it's not specific for DLBCL. So most of all the tumors from blue tumor, hematological tumors, they have this mutation, so they are going to identify anything and it's not specific for this type. So that was the situation. When I started with this, and then my colleagues in the University of Ulm, in the Clinic, told me, okay, Coral, we need to find cross typing of this germinal center derived of the cell lymphomas using DNA methylation, because a requirement so that we can really treat well and manage well all the patients relies on a universal classification. And at the moment, it's not available. I said, okay, well, I thought that let's look what is with DNA methylation. And then I looked into I want to see something. So talking about diversity. Diversity is nice. Diversity is great. The problem is this is the real world. So that was my discovery sample. My discovery sample had only 75 DLBCL, 85 follicular lymphoma, and 70 transitional ones. And you will say, I say, this is the biggest sample in the world from this kind of lymphomas, and it was necessary the collaboration of all these entities to get them and convince them to let us get into this data. So this is the cohort from the CGC MML consortium, and I'm taking part most of the German big hospitals and universities, important medicine universities. So once I say this, so just to tell you what is the DNA methylation, yeah, everyone has heard about mutation. So mutation will change the sequence of the DNA, but the DNA methylation doesn't change the sequence. We only put a methyl group that is something like a lollipop over the DNA, and the only thing that happens is that the double helix has to change the structure. And this means if we have many of these methylation points, it has to compact, and then most of the genes will not be available in this region for transcription or expression. And if we don't have them, it will be extended, and it's easy for the machinery to go to the genes. So we can see this like a binary state. So either you are in a position, you are methylated with one, or you are not methylated with zero. States are very easy, signature to find. In fact, I found in the literature that they have been using with a lot of success for gliomas, colorectal cancer, sarcoma, some leukemia, and that was a hope, okay? Leukemias, they happened before our germinal center, and mutation that happened before we go to the naive B-cell. I said, okay, this looks good. So I looked into the literature, and I saw that what the people were doing, you have a DNA methylation chip, and you get for each sample 450,000 CpG values. These values, they are whole beta values between 1 and 0. Here I'm just giving just a perspective, yeah? Less than one, or a little bit more than 100 samples, 450,000 features. So we have a problem. Usually there is the calculation of the beta values. Beta values are between 1 and 0. 1 you are methylated, 0 you are not methylated. And then there are some checks, etc. And the people usually what they did is get the 10,000 more variable CpGs, and then use Disney UMAP to see Latin classes and discover new groups in order to make supervised classifiers. And this works really nice. It's an example for chronic leukemia, for example, and it's being used in the clinic because each of these groups reflect a different trajectory in survival. So in fact, one of them, usually you don't get any kind of, you get only palliative care, yeah? So in some of them, it's the blue one. So I looked what happened, and I saw there were some initiatives about DNA methylation for DLBCLs and follicular lymphoma separately. None of them gave a result that could come up with different subgroups. So I started to think, why? What was the problem? And the problem has to do with a biological concept. the concept of methylation is a continuous process. We are changing our methylation during our whole life. But if we think in tumors, what happens in every round of proliferation, and they proliferate the whole time, this methylation becomes unstable. And this means that the body tries to repair, and then by repairing, because you are already wrong, then you bring something different, and then we get intratumor epigenetic heterogeneity. For example, what means this? Well, in a leukemia, for example, in a position, our CPG will be 1 in all samples of the same type. Here we can find a difference between 0.4, 0.7. So each point for a sample that is called as DLBCL can have very different values. So, and not only that, so we have 450,000 positions, and this combination can be extremely hard. So, and moreover, we can have combinations of this variation that give rise to the same result. So we have really a very complicated situation. So what I thought, or what we thought with this scene is, how can we reduce the CPGs to a number that can be used in the clinic, but that reflects all this heterogeneity. And here was the key. So we decided to make a new approach. I'm going to show you when we apply the normal standard approach for DNA methylation to this data. It doesn't matter that we use hierarchical clustering, camis, doesn't matter which kind of clustering you use, or I'm only reflecting the content of DNA methylation by the median. The only thing that we see, there are clusters that correspond to the already known things, or a continuum of methylation, as you see. So it's very difficult to see any kind of subgroups here, because everything is a continuum. So, and I got to show this image because it's very different from the last one below. So we decided, how can we change this? So the first thought was, the people are selecting here in this point, the 10,000 more variable CPGs. That's okay. Why? Because we have many genes in the body. They are housekeeping genes that they work for everyone, because otherwise we will be dying. So what we look when comparing controls and cases usually are those that have the greatest variability. And we say, okay, this is a standard, we stop here. But now we will not be doing this new human or anything like this. We have to find a way to select CPGs that are representative of the whole variation without losing information. So most of the people, or almost everyone working in epigenetics, what they do, they cluster by steps. So we changed this point of view and we say, no, we will cluster by CPGs. So we are going to try to find which CPGs are varying everywhere in the sample, which ones are similar, in two cases, 3, 4. So how can we get this? It's very easy. We can make a camis with an amount of cluster of K that is so big that will allow the things that are very different to be alone. So we decided to use 1,000 clusters because it's big enough. So we can have also now the result that we can have many different clusters, cluster with just one CPG, cluster with 2, cluster with 4, and the ones that are always the same in all the samples, they will have many CPGs. And then from this point, we came to a reduction to 1,938 CPGs, and then we went into our algorithm PGMRA, that is a supervised big cluster discovery algorithm based in modification from the negative multi-factorization algorithm. And then afterwards, we can analyze and explain with clinical explanation, molecular explanation, and validation with other samples and negative samples, the result that we obtain. So going back to the first part, the methylation clustering to reduce the search space in an unsupervised manner, for example, 343 clusters with just one CPG. This means that this CPG is different. These 343 are different all over the sample. And this kind of thing is the kind of thing that we need. So in this case, we took from the cluster category 1 to 3 CPGs, all CPGs, because we thought, okay, they are so variable, we need all of them. When we have clusters with 4 to 10 CPGs, what we do is we take the centroid and the two ones that have the greatest distance among them, because this is a very good representative. And in any case, we keep always track from which cluster they are coming from, so we don't lose this information. And in the cluster with more than 10 CPGs, that probably means that because our sample is so small, with 10 CPGs probably means that we have 10 samples that are sharing this. Probably it's not so important for the disease. So we are taking just the centroid as a representative, just not to lose information. So we were able to reduce the search to less than 2,000 CPGs. And then we came into our PGM array. Our PGM array, what is that is a fuzzy non-negative multifactorization big cluster discovery algorithm. What it's doing is just any kind of matrix to despite factors, and these factors they are later the clusters, and we don't have any kind of acceleration, so we don't decide the K that we are using for the cluster. So we use every possible K between 1 and the square root of the number of samples, so that we have all the granularity. This means that when we are finished discovering the big cluster, we have such a big amount of big cluster that we need to select them. Then we apply a multimodal multi-objective algorithm, and then we can make a statistical analysis, but also we can decode them. And because we know the features that were selected for each big cluster, we can give explainability to each of these tools. So, not to make it long, this is just a way to represent this algorithm, where what we do is for any matrix that of data that we give you, we learn the original matrix, describing the factors and correcting by the errors. So the value contains the features, ordered, and age contains the subjects, ordered, and then we multiply them, and we can localize the big clusters using some kind of constraints as sparsity and fuzzy membership. So this means once we don't have a sample can belong to more than 2 clusters. And this is very important for the case that we are seeing, because we see that the heterogeneity is so big. And second, what we find, there are local signals, and it doesn't have to represent the totality of the sample. What we have clusters that were a certain number of CPGs that have a certain value are describing a subgroup of the samples that we gave for discovery. We do all this without saying, in any case, totally data-driven, without saying whether it's a case or a control. It's just the whole sample. So we are not putting any kind of information. We do that before to select the big cluster that we are interested in. So the selection of big cluster usually is a trade-off between specificity, generality, and diversity of the big clusters. And then we obtain a multi-view with different granular partition. Usually the cluster that we obtain, they come from different cases. So they are looking at the sample from a different perspective. They are not exhaustive or redundant. So the result was that we were able to find 9 significant big clusters with different sizes. We have big clusters that they have represent 53 samples, another that represent only 9. So, and this is very important because we know that some of the cases that are very real, they are really big. So there are very few samples. And we know that there are some cases that are more populated, and this really came with it. All of them, they are very significant, and each of the big clusters, they are represented by different numbers of CPGs. At the end, we have 300 non-redundant CPGs, why 300 if the numbers are very big? Because the same CPG can be important for different big clusters. But in one case can be important being a high, having a hyperdefinition, but for other case can be important having local definition. Okay, I will discuss it. So the thing is, do you remember the first image that I gave you? So these 300 CPGs, they could be grouped in 4 modules of different sizes, and we were able to categorize all our samples in seven methylation profiles. The 7 methylation profiles, they correlated really strongly, but not only with the features that we know from lymphoma. So with the cell of origin, with the classification, the age, breakpoint, mutation B clusters. So for example, the 2 first methylation profiles, they are all of them follicular lymphomas. The difference between them, and both of them, they are GCD origin, and they have the arrangement in the BCL2 gene. The difference between the 2 of them, it was the age. The age of the MP2, they have a higher age in average. Is what we were talking before. And we know that usually they are not so bad, and they progress slowly than the ones for the young ones. Then we have the DNBCS, where 4 different profiles, MP4, 5, 6, and 7. They are similar. These ones are similar, and these 2 are more similar among them. So MP4, the difference between MP4 and MP5 is that MP4 has all of them, they have a mutation in P1 that it wasn't declared before. And in the case of MP6 and MP7, all of them, they were ABC. So these 2 are GCD, this one are ABC, and the difference between MP7 and MP6 is that here, most of them, almost 90%, they have a mutation in MID88, and this they were experiments from other people saying that that could be that some of them were like this, and BCL2 mutations. So we tried also to see, because we have all the information, whether there was a relationship with the epigenetic age, the expression of type 67, that is a marker for this tumor, and the proliferation history. And I have the table that it was put together to represent everything. In most cases, everything is significant. So, and most of the cases, they are significant between the similar ones. So it's very much possible to identify, according to these clinical features, the methylation profiles that are similar among them. We also wanted to know what happened, what are these CPGs that we were capturing as informative. And what we saw is that there is a very big difference between the group M1 to M3 and M4. So M1 to M3, they are located significantly enriched in close to the promoter of genes, and they are in positive promoter regions and bivalent TSS. This means that usually these are genes, promoter regions that are inactivated, but they can be activated immediately depending on the development phase. And this is very important one, because what we see, this problem here appears when we change in the maturity process of the PC lymphoma. And in the case of M4, they are located in enhancers, transcription, and chromatin regions. So CPGs that are located in genes that are being transcribed. And now we are looking very much into this, but because probably the best biomarkers are located in this one. So, and we have talked about reproducibility. So we were able to convince a lot of people to give us more data. So we were able to get other GCB lymphomas that are not of our type. So to try to see whether these 300 CPGs are able to distinguish them for ours. We wanted also to see what happens if we have these cells that are not malignant, so normal B cells of any type before, after, and whether these 300 CPGs can differentiate them from our lymphomas. And then we could convince a group that published just this year, 24, a group of primary central nervous system lymphomas that they were saying that they were DLBCLs, but no one could order them anywhere. So, and other DLBCLs, they are from another consortium, so that we can prove that it works for everything for reproducibility. So the results are amazing. So this is the result for the non-malignant female population. We see that in 300 CPG, isolate all kind of non-tumoral B cell population. Usually there is a general hypomethylation in the first group of CPGs, and people actually are hypermethylation in this other group. When we look into the different lymphomas that occurred before and after our process from ELCM, we see that they also appear clustered in a different way. So here what is very important is also that Burkitt lymphoma appear in the same process as the follicular lymphomas, but they take a very different way. And here we see that they can identify it. And in fact, this is a new line of research, but probably we will be able to get a common classifier for all of them. And this at the moment it was not possible. And last but not least, when we took the samples from all the consortium to reproduce them, all DLBCS, they are the red lines, they appear clustered with our MP4 or MP6. And the ones that it was the most interesting thing, the ones from the nervous system, they were clustering with the MP7. This is the one with a mutation MIT 1898, that is the one with a very bad prognostic. So in all cases, even unknown for 2024, they were clustering really well with within our classes. So another thing that it was very interesting, okay, the first thing that is known is that the methylation is correlated, everyone thinks methylation is correlated with gene expression. So because we had the data of gene expression, we say, okay, we look at it. And we look to the correlation for all genes, for the genes related to our 300 CPGs, and for the genes where the CPG was falling into a promoter in the beginning of the gene. And what we saw is there was no relationship. Looking into results, there are a lot of proofs in the literature that the correlation between methylation and transcription is not as general and so forward as one thought. So these results are also pointing to this direction concerning lymphomas. So take home message, we were able to find 7 different profiles that they correlate with non-mutational group, and additional information not known before about difference in biology, HR diagnosis, proliferation history, is orthogonal to current system and have a potential to differentiate other TCPC lymphomas such as BS and high-grade differentiation BCL with the full arrangement, and of also non-malignant cell population. So this is a take-home message, and only just to give you an idea. So here participated people of my lab, mostly Juan Emilio, the guy, and Raina Silva, that's my colleague at the University of Ulm. But here are most of the, not all of them, but many of the people that collaborated in this work. So the clinic from Barcelona, Max Planck Institute, the guys, ISTEM, so any of them. So thank you very much.
Any questions? We've got time for 2 questions. Come on.
So, did you, when you received the data, did you have to pre-process with expert knowledge of the data so you don't apply your models, or
no?
This is straight step.
So, this is a convention how you analyze the data coming from the Infinome chip. There is a standardized package in there, and everyone uses this, and it's already been proven to remove, you have a negative control, you have positive control to remove any kind of noise from the technique that you can have. The only thing that we added is an external quality check that has been published, where we see that in some cases the NIMFI package, that is the one used for analyzing this, was missing. And that was for the case, it was a very complex case, very technical, but we have people in the lab working with the technique. So we were aware of these problems and we removed them also, but they were not that many. So these are a forward step that you can use.
Nice. Thank you. Sorry, excellent comment. I really like it. I only have a question that is not clear to me. How exactly do you limit the number of clusters?
You mean,
The total number of clusters that you generate?
I don't delimit them, so.
You got to let it go.
No, I need everything. And then what I do is this with the objective optimization, where we try to have the Pareto frontier. So all the big clusters that are in the optimal Pareto frontier, so to say. And we draw the line for the optimal Pareto frontier that we want to have the biggest clusters possible, the more diverse, and in different niches. So more or less that is
Okay.
and then this change case to case. So sometimes we have fewer, and when we have been working with mental health, for example, the cluster networks that we were getting, they were so complicated that we really have to invest a lot of time trying to dig into it. Yeah?
So you're not afraid of overthinking?
No, at the moment, no. So I'm not in the same. So I would be afraid if everything would work perfectly, but we have already a lot of experience, and we still see margin for improvement because we don't have all the cases. Is what we see, but for all the cases that we have, it really works. And there's another thing. So let's say that the advantage that I have is that I can go back to biology. So because I have interpretable rules and I have the genes and I understand the biology, we can go back to the literature and see whether this has been proved before. And we have found in almost all the cases we have been working, that is there someone that somewhere found a connection of this gene that we find with the disease? So, but of course, it's a problem. But the thing is, the good thing is this big cluster, they have a structure. So they contain already information. So it doesn't matter whether I use it later, random forest, a support vector machine, whatever, but it will work great. Maybe it would change between 69 accuracy to 89 accuracy. But usually once we have already these big clusters and information they code for, it doesn't matter what for machine learning approaches.
All right, thank you very much for more platforms.
Thank you very much for
Thank you for doing.
next one. All right. So the next speaker is my very good friend Hernan. I met him 12 years ago when I first went to England, and I thought, shit, I don't know the language, and I want to socialize with people that speak Spanish, right? So he was born in Argentina, so I thought he would speak Spanish. But I soon learned that was a really big mistake. When we started talking, we were running actually quite a lot in Nottingham, I was like, fuck, I don't understand what he's saying. And it took me around, I would say, a good 5 to 10 years to understand what he was saying, and not because of the language. Well, it was because of the language, but he was born in Argentina. He actually studied in Israel, and then he did his PhD in Nottingham. So he's got a really, I would say, mixed, representative, very diverse set of languages in his brain, which makes things a little bit complicated. It took me, I'd say, 5 to 7 years to get to know what he was saying. He was talking a lot about biology. I couldn't get a single word. And at some point, actually, it clicked. And I was like, now I know what you're doing. And then that's when we started collaborating, and we did a few words that I believe you're going to be talking about today. He will try to blame me if there is something wrong in the computer science AI side of things. But yeah, sure, it was my fault. But he actually got me my most highest impact factor paper in my life, so I would say thank you very much in advance for your talk. So whenever you're ready, the floor is working. It's yours. It should be, but you know, it's technology, so I will trust it.
Okay.
Yeah,
we try. Thank you very much for the introduction, Isaac, and I want to thank you also for inviting me to this workshop. I'm presenting my work, and I have 2 news, one good and one bad. The bad one, I will talk about biology.
The good one is physiology, much easier. So we're going to. We're going for the old fashion. First, I will talk a little bit about the place where I work. I work at the Imperial College at the institute. Then, after my work for that, she was first president of the Thoracic Society, and she made a massive input in this area of research. And that's the center is advanced research to find a cure to pulmonary fibrosis. It's a terrible disease. Secondly, to improve diagnosis and health patient management. And finally, to participate in this type of workshops to raise awareness about this terrible disease. Pulmonary fibrosis is an umbrella term for a group of diseases that all of them have a characteristic that is an uncontrollable scarring of the lung, that is irreversible and is not a cure for any one of them. But the most terrible one is the hepatic pulmonary fibrosis. And every time we start with the hepatic, it is terrifying because it means that we don't know from where it comes from. That is from ancient Greek. So here, at the moment, there are two drugs that can stop the expansion of the scarring, that is infodamic and pedestal, but it's not well tolerated by all the patients and only can be used for a number of years. So here on your right, you have a CT scan of two patients, and marked in the arrow, like this, the arrow there, is some honeycomb-like structures that they are actually scarring on the lung. As we see, as is progressing over the year, is expanding of all the lung cavity and not allow the patient to breathe. So the patient is very debilitated. So sadly, the incidence, the number of cases in the UK is increasing of the disease. At the moment, that is still considered a rare disease. It's not a common disease. And at the moment, we know that there are about more than 6,000 new cases per year in the UK, and 30,000 people live with this condition and are living longer thanks to these drugs. But not mean that they're getting better. Primarily affect males in the ratio 3 to women, and are over 65 and former smokers in particular. And when they're feeling it for a number of years before diagnosis, they're feeling the weakness of the breathing, and they feel really weak, they have a cough, they don't know from where they come from. And once that they get diagnosed, they have a mean survival of 5 years at best. So the diagnostic is very challenging because the patients are extremely heterogenic. And it's really difficult to understand for the clinicians who will progress and who will deteriorate. As you see in the graph on the right, the distribution of the dot is massive around the mean. And the clinician that expected constantly the decline is around 10% per year. The diagnosis is a battery of tests that they need to pass through. They need to pass through the scans, laboratory tests to discover what type of PF they have, because the treatment varies a little bit here there. And there are no reliable biomarkers for determining progression, and either no useful biomarkers at the genetic level, even though we know some genetics play around. And from the spirometric test, that is a breathing test, can be used called FPC. That is the lung function. It's a surrogate of lung function, and it's used as a primary endpoint for all the clinical trials conducted for this disease. So what machine learning can help us, because it's unpredictable the deterioration of the patient. What expects from us is that machine learning can help us to model the lung function in long term, to identify distinct patterns across patients, and this way segregate to each other. And we hope that in the future, help us to predict decline and predict response to treatment, because the patient responds really different to that. So one of the techniques that I love to use is cluster analysis. Everyone loves it. Yeah, it's fantastic for data resolution. Always have the good thing that is Model declaration is great. Detect abnormalities. It's excellent for hypothesis generation. It's absolutely great. What is not particularly great? You're risking enormously overspan the number of clusters, and you need to control the number of clusters urgently. You cannot let it go. Because you need to balance the complexity and explainability of the model. You cannot go to the clinician and say, yeah, I found 3,000 clusters. What I do with that? And they will tell you, I don't know. And the bad things, absolutely bad things, is that absolutely terrible if you have outliers. And that generates clusters that doesn't exist and enormously depend on whatever they've been doing in the lab. If they commit a mistake in the lab, like batch effects, you need to correct for them. You need to be aware of what they've been doing. And you need to ask the laboratory technicians where exactly what they are there and discover if they've done something wrong. And you can correct it. We can correct. We have the technology to correct it. But that needs to be honest to us. And for that, we need to do something that therefore we need to do something like sensitivity analysis. And that is what give us that final answer if the model is working and if we can communicate it to somebody else. So what exactly is it? It's opening the black box of whatever the machine is doing. So ensure that the model is reliable and you trust the outcomes. Also, identify how the data point influence the results. Detect errors at all levels, theoretically. You can, depending on how stressed you want to do a sensitivity analysis, and improve the algorithmic and model design of the experiment. And finally, simplify the model and the algorithm structure for better usability and generability, and improve communication between the modeler and the decision maker that at the end of the day, from my point of view, is the clinician. And all the design of the sensitivity analysis that they've done is in communication with technicians, with the statisticians, with IAFER, that we discussed quite a lot, and we participated in many meetings that were quite heated. So here I will talk about little bit the database that we use in the profile specialty that is a landmark in the area of pulmonary fibrosis. It's the only one, the first one, that have done a systematic follow-up of the patients for 3 years. It was a multi-center cohort where I extracted data from the Brompton as a primary center and Nottingham as the tertiary center. We extracted a immunology test, particularly in the form of FPC, and we have a blood samples that we extract protein, mRNA, DNA. If somebody wants to do methylation, then welcome. And we have physiological measurements. It's important to say that the bias here in the UK, the majority of people suffering from this disease are white, 95%. So we cannot, based on this database, we cannot speculate at all what happened with ethnic minorities. And also in the UK, we have a really clear air compared with other places because we don't have any industry. So either we cannot say at all what's going on for the point of this environment. So here I will talk about 2 papers that I collaborated with Isaac. I think somewhere there. And actually here in this one. Yeah. And I tried to put in second, but that is like. And the first one, we try to describe the trajectory of the lung function decline over time. And the second one, we try to declare great clusters based on something called endotypes that will display data. So, profile like all the trials in this area of research have problems with missing data. And the missing data is mainly because the patients are really debilitated and they cannot come to the clinic on time. And they have exacerbations. Also, suddenly they start to feel really badly and they're not coming. And we could see the decline. And also, it's a problem with data management.
we need to acknowledge that. The problem is that who do the data management have the conditions and that the things that are not completely right. And also the maintenance of the database maintained by postdocs that not create diaries and not create the dictionaries about variables, and that can be quite messy. So what's the problem? The problem is that it creates something that called survival bias. As you see here, the green is a patient that survived all the profile the COVID study for 6 years. And you can see the green recognize decline over time. Here, already in red, you can see the patients that just survived 3 years. They completed the but they're quite different. So creating overestimation survival bias of the real decline. And it creates massive errors in the generation of the models for long decline. And that has implications in real life. The implication is that the first drug that was approved for use by the FDA was delayed by mismanagement of missing data by 6 years at least. Even if you see the date that was first published, started the trial capacity is 2005. From 2005 to 2011, they delayed the data because they knew that was something wrong. And that you convince the FDA to allow them to do another test called Ascent in 2014 was finished and approved the drug. So these have consequences. So what I propose is to, because I don't know what happened with the patients, I was proposing to use machine learning. So the first try was using the patient that survived the profile for 3 years at least, and generating the imputation. That was a massive discussion between my colleagues, and they told me, okay, well, we're going to generate biases on our data because the survivors, they have also something that the rest don't have. So what was the solution? The solution was using Monte Carlo simulation and expand the number with all the possibilities that could be in the decline. And that model is what we use for the training of our database, our imputation. And then we generated cluster using self-organizing maps that I really like this algorithm. I'm sorry. And then we generated and then we generated some specific tests to see how robust our architecture. After that, we got to find a biological meaning is the how, and after that, we validated an external core. So we obtained data from the Chicago consortium, and we validated our results as well. So here we divided the survival in 2 groups in a simulation database, and the simulation of missing data, that's 35%, and 75% we use for learning. If you don't know, the bigger the bar, bigger the error, and we compare imputation, relation to imputation frequency method, like linear regression, 10% extreme decline, and then that's starting forward, that are the methods that the Ascent was using for imputation against machine learning algorithms. One of them not supervised their neighbors, a random forest, and a random forest trained by Monte Carlo simulation. And what we found, that linear regression was the worst performing, that is the most common method of imputation for all the trials. And the best simulation was, the best imputation was performed by the Monte Carlo random forest. And particularly in the long term, after 3 years, it gave us the best results. It's a marginal improvement, but it's an improvement after all. So we did another assumption in our simulation. We created 2 simulations. One simulation where we created where we don't have any assumption. That is naive Monte Carlo. And after that, we did another simulation, but this is a theoretical one, where we assume that death is producing a 0 FPC result in the imputation. And what you can see that although never right to 0, 0, created a decline
an FTC that was quite valuable for us. But when we analyze further the degree of error, the naive version actually was better because produces less error compared with the theoretical one. So here you can see the trade-off that you can see, okay, for one side you capture better what is the climate, but for another side you create more error in the real world. So we prefer to use, okay, less decline, but less error in the real data set. So here are the 4 clusters that we generate, and we generate permutation to the how many clusters we have with an inertia cluster and an inertia test. And we found that no matter what permutation we use, the best number of clusters were 4. And also we try to see the allocation of patients, which you know the permutation. And we notice that more or less, when we compare with the complete data set, the allocation of patients by Japanese indices more or less show that the clusters, all of them that put in the same patients constantly in putting the patient more or less in the same order. So here we have the 4 clusters. We found 4 clusters of the long-function decline, cluster 1 that they have a quite steep decline of an FTC. That's was the biggest one, the green one. The yellow one had a very steep decline, and you have the red one, cluster 2, that had a mild improvement and a mild decline, and cluster 4 is pretty stable. And what you can see in the survival curves, that the long functions reflect, the cluster reflects really well the survival of the patient, saying that the FEC is capturing what happened with the patients in the long term. From the point of view of replication, again, we found the 4 clusters in the same proportion in Chicago. What surprised us was that, voila, the survival is totally offset. So there we have to do sensitivity analysis to see what happened there, why exactly the model is working. So we compare cluster 1 survival and cluster 3 survival, the 2 clusters of patients that actually the long function decline massively and they're matching in the survival. Cluster 2 that already we got see a difference, but not significant, but where was the big difference in the stable cluster. So there we ask our another question: what was the condition of this patient at the time that went to clinic? So we check the FTC. We done this graph, and we can see in green the patient that survived, so in profile. In red, the patient that died survived in profile, and you can see the yellow one that is Chicago. And the mean non-function in Chicago match the patient that will die. So I mean that at time of clinic, when the patient went to clinic, the situation was critical. So I mean that it's very difficult to compare the 2 clusters. Stability of non-function no mean that you're going to survive for long term. I mean that for long term, you're going to be really bad and potentially die. So the conclusion for the study 1 is that we make a realistic assessment of the disease progression through sensitivity analysis, assessing multiple factors of imputation. The number 2 is that we have a heterogenic non-function decline, but it's no monolithic. The patient not decline 10%, that decline in different ratios. We found that we assessed the trade-off between different types of simulations, and we found that better to use non-functions of 0%. We validated in the Chicago data set at least 3 clusters really well. And the 4 clusters showing the diversity, the changes in potential health care and when the patients arrive to the clinic. So stability no means survival, means stability. Now we're going to number 2. This one was pushed the Lancet of Veterinary Medicine. We know that EF is a genetic disease, as I showed you constantly, But we speculate or we think that although they're heterogeneous, they have groups that share some common biological mechanism. And this means that can exist something called endotypes. And now I'll show you what are endotypes. If you see the EM population that is extended to the Earth, the first degree stratification will be what we see. For example, the lung function, the CT scans will be the phenotype. The lower degree stratification will be an endotype that is in a specific pathway that can explain the observable characteristics of the phenotype and can be identified by specific biomarkers. So again, I use the profile dataset, but usual data constraints, we use only 455 patients and 13 biomarkers. And what we use is an algorithm that called consensus clustering and supervised clustering. And we make them both the 4 algorithms, and when we make them reach a consensus to generate a stable clusters. But the stable cluster, from my point of view, are only a mathematical construct to be used in the clinical techniques. Then you can pass 4 tests. The first one is the sensitivity analysis, different permutations, and prove that the clusters are stable enough to common clusters. After that, you need to find a biological meaning. After that, you need to phenotype them, see that how well is the survival, what is the lung function of each one of them. And the final stage is to replicate them in external database. For the replication, we obtained a database from Australia. Due to these people only analyzed 8 of 13 biomarkers, we used a machine learning algorithm that was trained on the mathematical characteristics of the clusters to localize to transfer learning patient that more or less resemble our clusters. And in this way, we validate our results. So if we zoom in the lungs, we can see this structure that look like bunch of grapes. That is alveoli, is where the oxygen transfers happen, but it's also where the fibrosis is happening in the patients. And what we can see that every biomarker that we use represents a distinct strata on the alveoli. For example, collagen 4 and 28 represent the basal membrane, CA15 and MPP7 represent the stress of the epithelial cells that are the ones that do the job of transfer the oxygen. And finally, XV represents thrombosis in the patient. All of them, they count on the blood of the patient, and we can collect it. This is a much more friendly way than collecting a biopsy. Imagine you do a biopsy here. The person who has pulmonary fibrosis can be deadly. And that makes it really approachable, this approach. So we did against our permutations, and we found that we have, no matter what permutations we have, 3 clusters. And we characterize the patient allocation by using a data points that we use for our analysis, because we're using only data collected at diagnosis, but we have data collected at 90 days, so we compare the clustering that we have at 90 days and at diagnosis in the different permutations, and we know that by checking indices that more or less pass the 50% threshold, meaning that the cluster is stable enough, and also that it's stable over time. So that gives us the idea that the patient are not flopping clusters as they progress, who will fall in the cluster, stay in the cluster over time. That was really good news. We try to describe what are the drivers of each cluster by analyzing eigenvalues. Eigenvalues are the vectors that are formatting the clusters, and we found that for the green cluster, 4 models agree that this is a Pro4, that is surrogate of collagen 4. 3, for the red cluster, 3 agree that they're a biomarker associated with epithelial injury. And 4 cluster for the blue cluster agree that is XV, that's associated with thrombosis. So that gives us already an idea for the names of the clusters. So we call the green one basal membrane, the red one epithelial injury, and the prothrombotic cluster.
For the point of view of biochemical constituents, we found that patients are located in the green group have high level of collagen 28 and 4. Patients are located in the red cluster that have high level of biomarkers associated with epithelial injury. And finally, patients are located in the blue clusters that have high level of protein-coated biomarkers. For the point of survival, we found that the patients that have a vascular membrane dysfunction have the best survival, and the worst survival was detected on the epithelial injury cluster. And we can see also the lung function decline in graph B and C, that the lung function decline also reflects the survival, where the worst performance is the epithelial injury. For the point of view of replication, in the Australian court also we found that the patients are located in the BM cluster grade, a high level of collagen 4. The patients are located in the light red, a high level of epithelial injury biomarkers. And finally, the X-linked clusters also these patients have high levels of this biomarker. What also we found that the lung function follow the same trajectory patterns that we see profile. That actually we found that we are really happy with the external validation. And the conclusion that the sensitivity of the analysis help to validate the number of clusters reflecting potential overfitting. The architecture and the biological signatures help to produce an activity of the model. Being bound in these different biological pathways, and also the survival and loss of function show the clinical importance for this model. Also, we managed to do that by replicated in external database, and that shows that machine learning can actually help the clinical decision making in this therapy disease. And finally, I want to thank to all these people that helped me. There's no work of only me, it's all of them. And there's Isaac. And if you have any problem with what I did, please talk with him. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Questions for him? You can attack now, especially in the biology.
So bring it up, perfect sense. It was really impressive. So this is a computer science question, and it's because I've also worked with clustering of time series. So what kind of distance metric were you using? Because and sometimes the results are really biased because of the distance metric, especially in clustering time series.
Well, that was a question that actually the reviewers asked us, and we use all of them. we put all of them, and distance metrics was everywhere, but indeed closer distances work pretty well if you want to know. That gives us quite good results. In general, they're quite consistent, no matter what metrics you use, in particular for the last one. That was very consistent across every metric that you want to use. But the reviewers, yes, they come with this question.
Yeah, because sometimes I've used it in all the domains, and it was so influential.
Yeah.
So
They have
we were working in marketing.
Yeah.
So it fully changed the results and the shapes of the clusters.
It can change, but at the end of the day, we say, okay, we try to make a consensus again. Which ones are, how many actually that agree with the distance, and actually we found it's a consensus. We put many, as you can see, there also we're using the consensus clustering that actually one of them totally is agree with all the others. Yeah, we use GGM. That totally is agree with the sums and K-means and everything. And so we try to include this diversity and uncertainty in the model.
Actually, probably it was because the time series was really short. So I don't think this will have a big influence, because maybe we're talking about a few data points. It's not like a really long time series.
We're talking about
that's probably why. But yeah, anyway, go for it.
Thank you very much for the talk. It's very interesting. I have one question. You use the biomarkers, only 13 of them, physiological response for prediction, gene expression, mRNA.
No, we don't use mRNA at the moment.
It's a problem with mRNA, a massive problem with pulmonary fibrosis, because if you do a global mRNA, that will give you, and that is a good example of what went wrong with this, will give you that the immune system go crazy in patients with pulmonary fibrosis. So it was the great idea that I had the trials, the people that conduct trials, give them to the patient immune avoidance therapy, and they kill the patients. Totally kill them, because what happened is that you cannot assume that the patients are monolithic. Yeah, you give to all of them the same treatment, you're going to potentially kill a good number of them. The same happened with antithrombotics. They give the antithrombotics to all the cohorts, to all the patients equally, and they kill the patient. And if you see the ratio is 1 to 3, that will benefit.
It was coming to my mind, so in this case, the last picture you show about the deterioration of treated areas, all of these has to do with methylation. So I don't know whether it would be good to look into the genetics of genotyping from the patients and methylation. Genotyping, because if you are a smoker, probably you are prone to a worsening outcome, depending on some kind of genes combination that you have, and the other one is the smoking alters very much local methylation.
But also the smoking, because of the damn mutation, SMPs, direct mutation,
Yeah, you have mutation.
already.
Yeah, but you have also methylation changes.
Yeah, the problem that we have with this type of global analysis is that for us it's very difficult to collect biopsies from the lung. The patient is so weak, and the animal model don't reflect what happened in the patient. That I have this question to clinicians: why we don't get biopsies? And the problem is that I will tell you now, we can't. If the patient is too weak to obtain the biopsy, and wherever you can to obtain from the patient are the best, the most stable ones. So again, you're working only with the green groups.
Yeah, but genotyping you can do from cellular.
Again, it's not reflecting what's going on.
No, that's genetic. That is what you could be.
Yeah.
What you are being.
Yeah.
You can detect.
But in the long respect, that individually will be different effects. So inside the lung, in the epithelial cells, if we're able to get the epithelial cells, and even different epithelial cells, even you can see it in already say long atoms, genetic atoms. And the long atoms, you will see that every cell have a genetic different component. So if it's epithelial injury, but only the epithelial cell will be the damaged ones, there you're going to get a very different outcome from the people that have the injuries in the basal membrane. So it's a really, I wish that we could. That would be my wish list, for some, but it will be really difficult to actually get this in the number that will be needed for it.
Thank you, Hernan. I have a very difficult question for you, but I'm gonna leave it for later because otherwise it's for second time. So one big clap. We do move to the last and not least, our very own as well, Daniel Peralta. They themselves, I don't know why it wasn't working for them. But it is working because they are just not patient. So if you haven't met Danny before, the best way I think of Danny's career is he did exactly the same thing I did, just 2 years later, because he's 2 years younger. But basically, he did exactly the same thing. I started my PhD, 2 years later, he started his PhD. I finished my PhD 2 years later. I went to Belgium, he went to Belgium. He took exactly my same desk here in Granada, same desk. There again, he didn't want to go to the UK. I think probably because of
pride.
and yes, it's not to follow exactly. But when I went to Nottingham, first thing I did, I took a picture of my office and I said, "Danny, do you like it?" But actually, he never came to the UK. But he came 2 years after me back to Granada. That's the good news. And with that good news, I'm gonna let you go and take us away. For the next 20 minutes or so, please. It promised me to be short.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was, thank you, Lisa, for introduction. Well, maybe it was 2 years after you or not, but we were both also working on bioinformatics at some point. In my case, it's a little bit different from what we saw before. It's about bacteria and antibiotic resistance of bacteria. So it's not a rare disease or rare case at all, unfortunately. Of course, it's how patient do you have to be with this?
Really patient.
That's work. What for me? Come on.
Go home.
Well, for 2 years.
Okay. So yeah, we all know probably it's you're all aware that it's actually a growing issue in the world that bacteria are getting more and more resistant to antibiotics. Part of it because of their abuse, both in humans and in animals. That when we consume animal products, some of the antibiotics that have been used there have caused bacteria to grow, I would say, stronger, to develop resistance to these antibiotics. And actually, it's becoming very concerning, especially when we project this into the future. The WHO is already saying that by it's already the goal of about 5 million deaths per year, or at least that was the data in 2019. By 2050, which is 25 years from now, it's estimated to have a huge amount of or a huge cost in healthcare. So we really want to deal with this somehow. So hospitals and doctors, medical doctors, they are already trying to limit the use of antibiotics. But it's, of course, we still need them. Okay, we still have bacteria that need to be dealt with and infections. So there is the question of how to use antibiotics then. Okay. So, how to be closer? No, okay. So over the years, we have been getting better and better tests to test whether a certain bacterium, okay, that you get from a patient is resistant or not to a certain antibiotic, right? So that once you know that, you can give the right antibiotic to that patient. Things that until 3 years ago, the standard method was some kind of antibody test that took about 3 days or so. So that's not really ideal. Now in the last few years, they are starting to use mass spectrometry for that. Okay, what's the long story short? Here you have a nice picture from this paper. What you do is that you take some sample. In our case, that is going to be a bacterium. You kind of vaporize some of the molecules of in your bacterium, make them fly through this kind of tube. Okay, and then depending on the type of light of these molecules, these ions in the tube, you can estimate the relation between mass and charge of that ion. Okay, so the time of flight will be proportional to the mass and the charge of the molecule, and then you get a profile for this. Okay, this is just a histogram, but for every mass charge, which is here in the x-axis, you have a certain frequency. Okay, so you will see some peaks. Here we actually have many profiles put on top of each other. But you can imagine that for a single bacteria, you will have a certain profile, and then you will have peaks for molecules that are abundant in that bacteria, and some flat region or a zero value if there is no molecule at all with that particular value of mass charge. So the idea of using mass spectrometry to detect antibiotic resistance is that, well, we know that there has to be some molecular difference between a bacterium that is resistant and one that is susceptible. Okay, I used to believe that was because it has some enzymes that break the antibiotics down. Then after a very nice talk with Peralta here present, she told me that actually most of the differences are mostly in the phospholipid cellular membrane of the bacteria. So thank you, Peralta, for that. But as data scientists, let's say, but the relevant information to be able to classify the bacteria will be that there is some difference in the profile. Okay, the question is where is it happening? Of course, first solutions were a little bit more manual and based on expert knowledge that okay, we know that if this kind of molecule is present, then the bacteria is going to be resistant, and then we look for this particular peaks, and then we can classify it. Of course, now we can do it a little bit more data driven. So This was a collaboration, by the way. It's not my problem. I was not actually not working alone. And it was research funded by the Chilean government. So here was Javiera López-Cortés, who was one who obtained the funding to work on this project for 2 years. She was working together with Jose, with her musicians. And then on my side, I was working with Leila, who was my master's student in Ghent. On the one hand, we started working on the project in 2022. So first results I'm going to show are from that current period. And then the last few slides are about actually the master thesis of Leila, and we're now preparing a paper based on these results. What kind of data do we use for that? The thing here is that, as usual, in hospital data, many hospitals have their own samples, their own measurements, so you can find this kind of data in many places. Of course, the hard part is to be able to get it. It's data that comes from people. We have, some privacy issues, some different, a lot of variability between the different machines that different hospitals use and so on. So, but very luckily, in 2022, there was a very nice publicly, or very nice data set that was made public, with the data from a lot of bacteria. I think in total they have some 400,000 bacteria that were measured. We only use a subset of that because they have quite a few species, so we focused on 3 of them, which are the ones that are the most relevant in Chile, which also happens to be some of the ones that are the most frequent in that data set. It was created in Switzerland, by the way, but still there are some of the most frequent bacteria that cause infections. So some of them are probably they probably sound familiar to you. The data has 18,000 features. Okay, each feature is just one point in this histogram. Okay, the frequency of the molecule with a particular mass value, and it was also split into 4 parts. Let's say this data set has a difference that each of these parts of ABCD was collected at a different hospital. So already in there you get some idea of the variability that you might expect from data from different hospitals, either because we have let's say different strains of bacteria just purely for geographical reasons, either just because the machines that they use in different hospitals are either totally different machines, either slightly different because of technical variability and so on. And they also tested these bacteria for multiple antibiotics. So what we did in this, let's say, first year or so of the project, which is already published, is that we took these data from these 3 bacteria. Classically, what is done is the first step of pre-processing those profiles. Okay, at the end is a histogram. So one of the let's say, very simple pre-processing that you can do to reduce noise is just to group the bits of the histogram. So instead of having 18,000 points, you might have 6,000. Okay, if you group points 3 by 3, and then you have a little bit less noise. Classically, when this process was done a bit more manually, they might be in bigger groups and then look for the bits that they know they are present. We wanted to avoid 2 things. Okay, one was to, of course, to do a lot of manual work. Okay, and we also wanted to avoid losing too much information, right? Because it might be that there is a very specific molecule that is interesting, even if the frequency is not very high. So we really did not want to, let's say, pre-process these too hard. I still did a little bit of it, okay, just to be also in agreement, let's say, with other technologies. But so yeah, that was it. It was a very, very simple pre-processing. Did a splitting between training, test, consolidation, and so on. And then, well, back then, it was one of the first, let's say, networks trained on this kind of data. So this first work was about finding or what kind of architecture would work well in this case. If you want to have a small look at the data, okay, here you see the A data set and the B data set, so coming from 2 different hospitals. You can also see that some of the bacteria are different. Okay, the A is the biggest one, so it was the one that we focused on the most. And you see that for these 3 bacteria, we always tested 5 different antibiotics for each of them. Some of them you can see that they are different. Okay, they are here for some bacteria, not for others. And you see that well, still fortunately, it's kind of an imbalanced problem. In many cases, you see that most of the bacteria are susceptible and only a few of them are resistant to some antibiotic. Some of them are resistant to more than one antibiotic. Okay, that's another level, let's say another level of complexity, but also it's very interesting in the data that some of these bacteria were actually tested for more than one antibiotic. So some of them are resistant to more than one, of course, susceptible to more than one. Okay, so from a data perspective, we actually get a very interesting problem that we can identify and say as multi-label, okay, but also incomplete, because we don't test for all the antibiotics for all the bacteria. Sometimes a test just one, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes all of them. Depends a little bit on how they do at the hospital, what the needs are. So as I said, the data set is very nice, very interesting, but also kind of challenging in that sense. Well, here, Jose, especially who was a guy working on this, did a lot of variations of the architecture to see well, what kind of structures in the network could work better in this case. What we have actually is data that is relatively simple. It's just one-dimensional data, okay? Just with a length of 6,000 after our pre-processing. But at the end, we found out that well, the architecture that worked well was a simple convolutional network, here with a 1D convolution at the input. Then well, people want few convolutional layers, few fully connected layers. We drop out a very, very, very classic simple architecture, and at the end we have a sigmoid activation for just one molecule. And that will tell us if a certain bacterium is resistant or susceptible to one antibiotic. Okay. What's the catch of this? Let's say is that you have to train a model for every species of bacteria and every antibiotic that you want to test. Okay, that's the first thing first. This was the first approach we were trying. Okay. When we were comparing against the baseline, okay, here was a bit kind of a gradually introducing more structures or more parameters in the network. So this was with batch normalization, this was with profile as well. We saw that actually this kind of batch normalization, profile, and so on helped. And the end we should well improve both on the base network, okay, but also on the results from the literature. These are actually the results of the people who published the data itself, where they followed a bit of a more classical approach. Okay, where they used SVM, random forest, and so on. They compared several algorithms. They took the best, and still with a simple, relatively simple neural network and so training, these results could be improved for the most part. There was also a very small variability between our folds of our consolidation, so that's also quite interesting. So we know that the models are relatively robust with this variability. So this is all good. We have a model. In that time, okay, that was like 1-2 years ago, we did the state of the art. We were very happy. But of course, there are still a lot of concerns, right? We know that accuracy is not everything. So we still have a few issues, which is that we want our model to work on, let's say, ideally any hospital. Okay, it's quite useless to train these on data from some hospital in Switzerland. The data is great, but then you want to use it here in Granada, it doesn't work anymore, okay? Because the machine is slightly different, because the pre-processing might be slightly different, the bacteria might be slightly different, and so on. Okay? And also it has the issue that we will have to retrain the model for every antibiotic and every bacteria, every strain. So we a bit assumed in many cases that you say, okay, if you want to, you have to have a model to classify Escherichia coli for meropenem and a model for Escherichia coli and whatever other antibiotic and so on. But actually, it would be much more comfortable, many ways, to have just one model that will be able to tell you about many different species of bacteria, whether they are resistant or susceptible to, let's say, the same antibiotic. Okay, it might be that some of the resistance mechanisms are common to several species or several strains of bacteria. It might be that some are not. But still, in the profile of this bacteria, there will be many molecules that actually will be the same. Okay, there will be some common parts in there. In any case, there are several advantages to training a single, larger, really more complex model than many smaller or more simple models. Okay? Now, on the one hand, that we can learn more from the data. On the other hand, we can have also more data that will lead us to a more robust model. So this is what we wanted to have. Okay? The last part that is here, that I didn't mention yet, is that we also wanted to make the best out of our multi-label data. We know that one bacteria can be, or one bacterium, sorry, I have issues with the plural, and one bacterium can be resistant to more than one antibiotic, okay? So, to be, let's say, more efficient, again, to train a single model that can predict susceptibility or resistance to more than one antibiotic. That would be a multi-label model. What's the challenge in here? That our multi-label data is not fully labeled. We have some degree of incompleteness. So that's what I will go bit by bit. Okay. The first issue here is the issue of working with data from other hospitals. The out of the box issue for that will be transfer rate, right? I think you probably all heard of it already. The idea is that you train a basic model or basic model on the data that you have. Okay, but the more the better. In our case, to simulate that, our base model was trained on this 3A data set. This is a model that I showed before. And then you take a tiny amount of data from, let's say, different hospitals. Okay, so we tried with the ECFE, just a few bacteria, okay, just a few tens of points. So the minimum amount that you can take, just to fine-tune the training of your model, okay, to train a few more iterations with a tiny amount of data, and that should be enough to classify the data from this hospital much better. Okay. So the idea is that none of these hospitals on their own, none of these data sets on their own are large enough to have a good model. But if we start from the model trained on A, we fine tune it for B, C, or D, we get a model that is roughly as good as the first one for A. So here again, we try different combinations, freezing all the layers, not all the layers. Or actually for deep learning standards, we don't have that much data in this case. We had a few thousand points, which in other contexts, like for example, compared to the data that Peralta has with a few applications, this is amazing. This is like Christmas. If we want to train a large network, it's actually not that much. Okay, so we had to be selective in what could be done in this case. But still, we found out that in most of the cases, retrain the entire network with this tiny amount of data was actually good. Here we try to be really careful about doing our cross-validation quite well, having a separate test set to really avoid overfitting our own data because the data was not that much. But on average, you could see that this transfer learning was actually working relatively well. We also see that the differences are, the results are relatively different also for different species of bacteria and different antibiotics. Okay. So that there are some resistances or some antibiotics that are easier to predict than others. So all until now is what we did in this first publication that we did before. So at this stage, Leila Hernan, she said, I want to do a very interesting master thesis. So we proposed her, okay, why don't you go one step further? Here we have this, let's say, relatively simple deep learning model that can predict resistance to one antibiotic for one species of bacteria. Why don't you go to this multi-bacteria, multi-label case? Okay? Let's try to make the model a little bit richer and to evaluate whether it is possible or not to predict everything at the same time. So she did that, okay, so took her whole year. And she ended up with 4 variants of the problem, okay, 4 possibilities. First one is a single bacteria, single antibiotic, which is what I showed before. Okay, the baseline is this model from the 2024 paper. And then she had one that was multi-species, okay, so same output for one antibiotic, but where we could have several species as the input. The other one was the multi-labeled one, okay, so the multi-antibiotic classifier is for one single species, you have more than one antibiotic as the output. then you have to change. The only change in the architecture is actually the output layer. Right? There you have, instead of having €1 to predict one antibiotic, you have one per antibiotic. And then she had a combination of both. Right? This was our goal, to evaluate whether this was useful or not. Okay? So we have a model with many outputs and also many possible species as in. And then she was also testing some transfer learning there to see again if the model was useful on, let's say, one hospital, but also if it could be fine-tuned from for other hospitals. Especially in the last case, okay, or actually the two multi-label cases, as I said before, we have incomplete data. Okay, so the simplistic way to deal with that would be to say, okay, we only keep the data that is fully labeled, in which case you lose most of the data set, okay, because most bacteria are actually labeled for some of the antibiotics, but not all of them. So the other change to the architecture, apart from the size of the output layer, was also the loss function. Okay, so we have a simple variable, which is a masked loss function, which is that you only compute the loss for a certain output if you know the label for that. If you have the knowledge whether one bacterium is resistant or not to one antibiotic, then you include that in the loss function. Otherwise, you don't include it, you have a zero there, and then you don't have a gradient, so weights are not calculated. You keep taking that output into account. In other words, outputs that are not known as ground truth are ignored by the training process of the model. Okay. That was well, necessary to be able to deal with this incomplete data. But still, she took it a bit one step further, and she went for self-labeling. Okay, so for those of you, I know that some of you in the room have worked on semi-supervised learning. One way to work with semi-supervised learning, where you have data set, some of your data is labeled, some is not. There is a very simple idea, which is that you take the labeled data, you train a classifier, and then you predict labels for the unlabeled data. Then you use those predicted labels, assuming that most of them will be correct, okay? Because if your classifier works okay from this labeled data, well, these predicted labels are kind of okay, and then you can use them to retrain your model using a larger amount of data. Even if there is some, let's say, uncertainty, there will be some errors in those labels, it's still, well, in some cases, it can improve the quality of the results, especially if you don't have them. So I was testing these, okay? And instead of just going, let's say, all the way to a simple sub-labeling to predict labels and put them there in the data, she did something that was a little bit more conservative. Okay? It was iterative sub-labeling. You have with the scheme, but the idea is again very simple. It's to take advantage of the fact that the neural network will give us, with our sigmoid activation, okay, we have from prediction of resistance or not, we will not have a 0-1 response, but a real number between 0 and 1. If you want to interpret that as a probability of the class, it's not really a probability, it's a confidence, okay? So you can say that if you have an output of 7, then well, the model is 70% confident that this bacteria is resistant to the antibiotic. Okay? So she did that. So if the prediction was with more than 70% confidence, then she assigned that label to the bacteria, and then the bacteria was again used to train the algorithm. So she did that. You can see it here for a few iterations. Yeah, maybe let's focus on the blue line. I think is most representative. That she started with some 30,000 values that were unlabeled, and after a few iterations, you can see how the number of unlabeled items is decreasing. Okay. This is results from last week, so there are still some issues with the plots. For example, the y-axis does not start at 0, so we still have some 12,000 or so cells, bacteria that are never predicted with a confidence of 70%. It also raises some more issues that if you want to do it really properly, you have to evaluate how accurate this confidence is. So the model says the output is 0.7 for this set of bacteria, for instance, but how sure are you that the real probability of the positive class is 70% or not. That's called traffic biocalibration, something that we still have to look into. But here at this stage, it's not done. Okay, for these the master thesis, let's say it was a little bit out of scope, so we closed the work without before we got to try. Okay, now the results. We were almost finished. Again, we were really careful not to overfit our training set, so we had a totally separate test set that we obtained in the stratified way for all the combinations of bacteria and antibiotics. And we had a training set where we did a proper consolidation, and we were checking that the variability between the folds is not very high, except in some cases where it's a tiny bit bigger, but in general it's quite relatively good. And then we had the results on the test set which reflect more or less the same behaviors. But what we see, long story short, is that, well, especially in here where we take the variability into account, we have no single model that is systematically better than all the others. Okay? So as we go to the right, the complexity of the models is increasing. Okay? But still, in some cases, actually our baseline model, so the one that we published last year, is still actually the best one. The differences are not very high. We go from 85% accuracy per plot, sorry, 85% area of the curve to 81%. But still, it's a tiny bit better in the baseline. But there is no significant decrease either. So the thing is that to obtain these, we have to train, in our case, it was 15 models. To obtain these, we have to train a single model. Actually, it's quite more comfortable to use the model on the right, even if you use a tiny bit of accuracy. Actually, it might be worth it for the power of being able to classify multiple bacteria and multiple antibiotics all on the same model. More questions that you might have that I don't have the answer yet for. How well does it work for antibiotics that you have not really tested before the training set? Because once you have these, a trivial question would be, what happens if you want to test a new antibiotic? Okay, how little data do you need to be able to make the model work? Okay? Or a new species, okay, that would actually be quite easy to test. We're still on it. We haven't. I don't have results to show you. But yeah, what if you train this model on these 3 species and then you have another strain of bacteria? Can you predict resistance to the same antibiotics accurately or not? Or how much data do you need to make the model? So that's let's say that will be the next step in this kind of research if we are able to go on, because actually the project is finishing, I think, next month, March. Hopefully we can still go on a little bit further. And here you can see all of the results of the test set. So really for going overfitting. We also did some statistical tests, okay, to find out if some of the models is systematically better than the others. We can see that, well, on average, this multi-species, multi-label model runs a little bit better than the others, okay, especially the one with self-labeling. If we check out pairwise results, I don't have the table here because we're still, I don't want to show data that is not 100% tested, but we saw few differences actually. We saw that actually these 2 models, the 2 multi-labeled ones that are trained on all the species, are a little bit better than these 2, okay? The baseline, as I said, sometimes it's a little bit better, well, never systematic, statistically, never with statistical significance. So you have, in some cases, you have a trade-off that training a single model on one bacteria and one antibiotic gives you actually a good result. In general, training a single model on everything that we have here gives us better results than the other options. And then, well, this is a bit of a summary as of the conclusions. Okay, that we have this network that is working relatively well. We still have a few questions to answer, basically using data from other countries and other hospitals, and also seeing how adaptive these models are to data that they have never really seen before. Thank you, and for questions.
Questions? I might not play, so come on. Thank you.
Do you think that excellent talk. Of Stanford learning. Do you see that again? I see the more better point the single bacteria in place of multiple bacteria that is more the change the or the possible you capture also better the solution that way.
Yes, mathematically it's more simple that way, but we have like two reasons to try to make a multi-label or multi-bacteria model. One of them is for easiness of use, right? That if you can work with a single model that can predict everything, well, training times are much lower, the space that you need to, amount of memory that you need on your cluster, your GPU or whatever it is lower, everything becomes a little bit computationally more simple. But it's true that mathematically the problem is more simple if you train, in our case, 15 separate models than one large model. But the other reason that we had to try this, okay, was that by training one model for many bacteria, actually suddenly we have a lot more data that we can use for training, because we can use training set with more bacteria, but also with because of the incomplete labels, let's say, we are not restricted to only bacteria that were tested for this single antibiotic. But we can use bacteria also in the same training set that were trained on other or that were tested for other antibiotics. So the size of the training set actually grew much bigger than what we could have when we were training 15 separate models. We see that, well, this large model itself was not really significantly better than having 15, let's say, very specific ones, but also we don't see any significant decrease of the accuracy at all. Actually, on average, the new model, the big model, is better than the basic average. What we were seeing here, that still the average rank of these two options is quite lower than one of the basic things. That looking for pairwise comparisons across all bacteria and all antibiotics does not give us statistically significant differences, meaning that maybe for some of these combinations, the baseline is still a little bit better. But in most cases, actually the large multi-bacterial, multi-label model is working really well. So yeah, future research is also about to see how flexible this multi-bacterial model is. And really the big advantage will be that if now we have a much bigger sample with more species, maybe more antibiotics are tested, hopefully it should still work much better than training specific models that are restricted in the amount of data that we can use.
Very nice work. So maybe it's a very damning question. I don't know anything about the problem, but I can understand as a non-expert observer that there is a difference between the resistance on the different antibiotics and the different bacteria and so on. But when you said that the four pieces of the data set, so you train the network on one of them, and it didn't work at all for the others, so there is a diversity there, should be because of the patients themselves or the acquisition of the
characteristics of the machines.
The differences in the machine and the solutions and
or the acquisition.
not the room, so this is very prone to differences depending on the room, humidity, situation. No one can work in this.
So it's more related to external conditions than the bias, the resistance of the.
Yes. It's actually, I was thinking about that one in both of your talks where you use clustering, and you say that actually clustering is very difficult to use on biological data. A few years ago, we had a project not on this, but it was on using data. We had 600,000 cells, I think, from a human liver. It was all coming from the same liver, same person, same everything. And we did a clustering, and what we were seeing was that the data, of course, it took them more than 1 day to record, to measure all the cells. And the very clear information we got in the clustering was the date where things were measured with the same machine, the same stuff and everything, but you have tiny differences in the illumination, maybe temperature conditions.
And were you aware of that when you started your research, or you just it's just showed up after your first experiment?
In this case, in this example, we were not aware of it. Yes, we knew that this would happen. Maybe we were hoping that it was not that big. And that the actual biological difference we were looking for would be a little bit bigger. But we knew that it could happen, and it's why we spotted it so fast. In this case, yeah, like Peralta says, I'm not sure.
No one was doing it. I mean, we started the speech to America on this phone because we thought that because of the process of the technique and no one was speaking around budgeted, and we come from genetics, transcriptomics, proteomics, the budgeted is really pain. So we really have to plan that and we say, okay, let's look at what this kind of data they have budgeted, and they have budgeted and a bit very much, and the budgeted it accounts not only for difference between labs, but also between years. So,
But you don't try, for example, something like what can local actually
Not yet.
Because you need to try normalization.
Yes.
Time frame, because they have the time.
is a program, is a compact, is not for very small data sets, and here you are facing huge data, so it's not you have managed.
Yes, yeah.
A new development, so we start approaches from biology to this kind of data sets, and we see there is a room for
A lot of different.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question from, I think.
So it is just an idea. I can tell you later if you want.
Fred, come on, I'm sharing.
It's just an idea. You asked before, what can we do? We have a new bacteria to analyze or a new species to analyze, and I grab and we can do transfer learning without the last layer of the head of the model in sense of you can add a final layer with more classes with the classes that you want. I suppose you took into account.
Yes, that's the thing, that if you add a new species of bacteria, for instance, the difference is only in beam, so you can work exactly with the same architecture. And then if you're lucky, let's say, the model will already give you kind of a good picture. It's something that we haven't tested yet. It's a bit of a hope that it will be like this, but something that should be evaluated. But as you say, if you include a new antibiotic, then you need one more, let's say, column, let's say one more dimension in your output matrix.
I mean one more layer or different layers to have one more neuron to the neuron class.
Yes, that's also like that. You have one more output neuron, but the rest of the network can stay the same. Hopefully, you have to retrain a little bit with information from this new antibiotic, but if you're really lucky, this will be only the weight of the last layer. If you, let's say, it might be that the problem is complex enough, which is it's usually the case in biology, that you have to retrain the whole network. But still, you start from a relatively good one. You start from a network that is able to classify several species of bacteria into resistance to several antibiotics. So you might imagine that many of the characteristics of the data are already taken into account. Even if you still have to do some retraining, you will need a lot less data than the one that will be used to train the whole model.
I think this is a really good case study for zero-shot learning and few-shot learning is trying to learn when, okay, something comes up, how do we deal with that quickly, right? And adaptively. Anyways, we will talk. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. 2 hours and a half became 3.5, but we all knew that before coming, didn't we? Anyway, thank you very much. Have a good day and see you next time.